The dream tenant isn't always a dream. It can be a portfolio killer. That nice person who pays on time and stays for 20 years might feel like stability, but on paper, they can silently destroy the landlord's net worth. And if you've ever thought as long as it's occupied, the property is performing well, stay with me. Because in the next few minutes, I'm going to challenge that belief with simple math. Quick disclaimer up front. This is educational, not financial advice. Real estate laws, rent rules, and tenant protections vary a lot by location, so always verify anything important for your specific situation. Here, why this matters. Whether you're a renter trying to predict what might happen to your rent, or a future landlord trying to build wealth without stepping on financial landmines, the biggest risk is often not vacancy, it's complacency. The enemy in this video is the passive mindset. The lazy assumption that just because a property is occupied, it's doing well. By the end, you'll understand 3 ideas that explain why long-term tenants can be a problem for landlords. Even when the tenant is a great person, you'll learn what loss to lease is, why sitting tenants can block renovations that increase value, and why turnover, what investors call churn, is often necessary to maximize an asset's value, even if it feels uncomfortable. And I'll show you how a property can look stable on the outside, while quietly sliding into what I call the zombie zone. Now let's make this real. Picture this. You're at a coffee shop with your friend Dave. Dave owns a small rental and he's smiling like he cracked the code. Dave says, "I've got it made, Steve. My tenant, Mr. Henderson, has been in the unit since 2015. He never calls, never complains. It's pure passive income." And honestly, that sounds perfect, right? No vacancies, no late payments, no drama. But then I raise an eyebrow, pull out a calculator, and ask Dave one question. "Dave, what was rent in your area in 2015? He goes, "About $1,000. I ask, "And what's rent now for a similar unit?" He hesitates, "Probably 2,200. And I say, "So you haven't raised it much because he's nice, which means you're not making money, you're donating." Then I punch in the numbers. $2,200 market rent minus $1,000 actual rent. That's $1,200 a month. That's $14,400 a year in lost revenue. Dave's jaw drops, and in your mind's eye, the camera zooms into Dave's wallet and moths fly out. This is the part no one talks about. Long-term tenants can feel like safety, but they can also be stagnation, and stagnation is expensive. So what's actually happening here? A rental property is a business, and your product is housing inventory. That inventory has a market price, just like anything else. Loss to lease is the gap between what the market says you could rent the unit for today and what you're actually collecting, and loss to lease usually happens for very human reasons. Landlords hesitate to raise rents because they fear vacancy. They don't want confrontation. They feel emotionally attached to the tenant, or they simply don't track the market closely. Here's the myth. Occupied equals profitable. Reality, occupied can still mean underperforming. Let's do a clean example. Not your exact situation, just an example. Say your unit could rent for $2,200 today, but you collect $1,700. That's $500 a month of loss to lease. $6,000 a year. Now pause and think. If you owned a business and one product was priced $500 below market every month, would you call that stable? Or would you call it a leak? And here's the part most people miss. Loss to lease doesn't only reduce monthly cash flow, it can reduce the value of the entire property. Because many rental properties are valued based on income, and lower income often means a lower sale price. Now add the inflation trap, because this is where stable turns into dangerous. Rent might stay flat or rise slowly, but property taxes don't care that your tenant is nice. Insurance doesn't care, and repairs definitely don't care. So you get 2 lines moving in opposite directions. Expenses trend up sharply, especially in inflationary periods. Rent creeps up slowly if it moves at all. At some point, those lines cross, and that's the danger zone. The unit is occupied, but the business is financially dying. That's why I call it the zombie zone. The property is alive because someone lives there, but financially dead because it can't support its own costs. Common mistake. People look at gross rent and stop there. They see money coming in, and they assume the property is performing, but performance is net after expenses and after opportunity cost. So here's a simple way to pressure test reality once a year. Estimate market rent for your unit just by looking at comparable listings. Subtract what you actually collect. That's lost to lease. Then list your big expenses: taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance. If lost to lease plus rising expenses is squeezing the numbers, you don't have stability, you have delayed pain. Now the big question: how do long-term tenants create that pain mechanically? Let's break down the 4 big ways. First, the time capsule effect, and why you can't force appreciation with someone sitting in the unit. Here's a contrarian truth. A lot of real estate wealth isn't made from monthly cash flow alone. It's made from equity, the value of the asset. And one of the main ways landlords grow equity is by forcing appreciation. That means improving the property. New floors, updated kitchen, refreshed bathroom, better lighting, curb appeal. The stuff that justifies higher rent and raises the property's value. But you can't renovate a unit easily when someone lives in it. So a long-term tenant turns the unit into a time capsule. Year 1, everything feels fine. Year 5, carpet is tired, paint is scuffed, appliances are aging. Year 10, the kitchen is dated, the bathroom looks old. The flooring is worn, and because the tenant is still there, the landlord often delays upgrades. No downtime, no rehab cycle, no reset, so the unit degrades quietly from the inside. Now here's the hidden bill. When the tenant finally leaves after 10 or 15 years, the landlord doesn't face a small refresh. They face a lump sum rehab bill. A normal turnover between typical tenants might cost, say, $2,000 to $4,000. Paint, cleaning, a few fixes, but after 15 years, you might be looking at $25,000 to $40,000. Flooring, cabinets, countertops, appliances, plumbing surprises, maybe mold, maybe subfloor issues, and that bill arrives all at once, right when you also have vacancy. Let me ask you a simple question. Would you rather plan small upgrades over time, or get punched in the face with a $30,000 surprise? That's why long-term tenants can be a portfolio killer, not because they're bad people, but because the asset gets stuck in time. If you own property, the practical move is to treat reserves like oxygen. Set aside money monthly for capital expenses, even if the tenant stays forever, because the building won't stay new forever. If you're a renter watching this, this explains why landlords suddenly renovate aggressively right after a long-term tenant leaves, and why the new rent jumps hard. They're trying to recover years of stagnation in one shot. Second, the mark-to-market gap, the math that traps landlords even when they're raising rent. In a hot market, a 5% annual rent increase can still fall behind. Because sometimes the market doesn't move 5%. It moves 15%, 20%, even 30% in a single year in certain neighborhoods. Not always, not everywhere, but it happens. So landlords who increase slowly can still lose the race. Example, you charge $1,000 and you raise it 5% per year. After 1 year, you're at $1,050. After 5 years, roughly $1,276. But if the market is now $1,500 or $1,800, your rent is anchored to the past. Now add rent control or rent stabilization, soft or hard. In some areas, increases are capped. In others, landlords hesitate because they fear losing the tenant, or fear public backlash, or fear vacancy, so the gap widens. And here's the key point. Investors buy based on income. Lower income often means a lower sale price. So a unit rented far below market doesn't just reduce monthly profit, it can reduce resale value. Picture an anchor chained to a house. The house wants to float up with appreciation, but the anchor says low rent and it holds the asset down. If you own rentals, you don't need to spike rent irresponsibly, but you do need awareness. Track market rent regularly, at least quarterly, so you know whether you're drifting. If you're falling behind, you need a plan. Whether that's improvements, lease structure, or preparing for turnover. And here's the myth bust that changes how people see everything. Most people fear vacancy. They treat vacancy like failure, but in real estate, the bigger risk is often stagnation. Vacancy is visible, it hurts fast, and you respond. Stagnation is invisible, it hurts slowly, and you ignore it until the numbers are ugly. If you remember one line from this video, make it this. Don't fear the vacancy, fear the gap. Third, the psychology of entitlement, the part no spreadsheet captures well. When someone lives somewhere for a long time, they stop feeling like a renter. They start feeling like an owner. Not always, but often enough that landlords plan for it. You see it in small ways. They stop asking permission to paint. They treat the hallway like personal storage. They report maintenance late. Oh, that leak. It's been dripping for 3 years. I didn't want to bother you. And then when a rent increase comes, they react like it's betrayal. They say, I've been here forever. Or, I've been a good tenant. Or, you can't do that to me. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Longevity can blur boundaries, and blurred boundaries increase risk because small problems go unreported. Rules get bent, inspections get skipped, documentation gets sloppy. A landlord needs routine inspections where legal, scheduled updates, clear written policies, and prompt maintenance reporting. Turnover resets that. New leases reset that. Fresh inspections catch problems early. If you own property, keep the relationship professional. If you're a tenant and you want long-term stability, treat the place like a partnership, report issues early, keep the unit in good shape, and understand the market doesn't pause because you've been there a long time. Fourth, liquidity and the owner-occupier premium. When you sell a property, the highest bidder is often not an investor. It's often an owner-occupier, a regular person or family who wants to live there. They sometimes pay more because they're buying a home, not just buying a spreadsheet. But if you have a tenant with a valid lease, you may not be able to deliver the property vacant. That can wipe out a huge chunk of your buyer pool, so you're forced to sell mainly to investors. And investors will discount the property if the rent is below market, if the unit is dated, or if the tenant situation limits flexibility. So long-term tenants can reduce liquidity, and liquidity affects price, if you might need to sell within a certain time horizon. Lease structure matters. Unit condition matters and flexibility matters. Now let's put all of this together with a simple simulation. 2 buildings, same city, same decade, totally different outcomes. Imagine 2 nearly identical buildings. Building A is run by the stabilizer. Same tenants for 10 years. Rent increases are 2% per year, minimal upgrades. If it's not broken, don't touch it. Building B is run by the optimizer. Average turnover every 2-5 years. At each turnover, they do targeted upgrades, maybe kitchen and bath improvements over time, lighting, flooring. Then they re-rent at full market rate. Now fast forward 10 years, building A looks calm on the surface, occupied, quiet, stable. But inflation did its thing, taxes up, insurance up, labor up. Repairs cost more, then a roof repair hits. A big one, and because rents are low and the building wasn't optimized. Cash flow can't comfortably absorb it, so building A's bank account grows slowly, then takes a huge hit, maybe even goes negative when that repair arrives. When they sell, the building sells for $500,000 in this example, because income is low, units are dated, and the buyer is an investor demanding a discount. Building B had turnover, which felt annoying, but it created step-by-step upgrades. Rent bumps happen like a staircase. Cash flow was higher, so the roof repair is painful but survivable, and because units are modern and rents are near market, the building is valued higher. It sells for $850,000 in this example. Same city, same decade. Totally different wealth outcome. That's the point. Stability is an illusion if it costs you market value. So let's bring it home. First, stability is not the same as performance. An occupied property can still be under-earning, under-upgraded, and quietly losing value through loss to lease. Second, properties degrade. Sitting tenants often slow renovations, which blocks forced appreciation and creates massive rehab bills later. Third, the mark-to-market gap matters. If rent falls behind the market, the property becomes an anchor, lowering cash flow and often lowering resale value. Fourth, liquidity matters. A tenant and lease structure can shrink your buyer pool, pushing you toward investor buyers who negotiate hard. I'm not saying you should kick out good people. Not at all. I'm saying you need to run a business, not a charity. If you are subsidizing someone's housing by charging far below market, you should know you're doing it and check if you can afford it. Be the CEO of your portfolio, not a passive bystander if you want a simple way to pressure test a rental's health. Hit the like button if you want Average Dave to finally raise his rents before his passive income becomes an expensive hobby. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.